Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 4. Really happy to be here and to have you on board watching the show. We got a great topic tonight, a great guest joining us. As you know, the ABL Down on the Farm is a prospect-based podcast dedicated to all things prospects, but particularly prospecting in the ABL, our 30-team dynasty league. With 20 minor league slots for a glorious, as I always say, 600 prospects that we can talk about and analyze and debate. And I'm joined tonight, very thankfully, as a pinch hitter for my guest who had to cancel. I'm joined tonight by Josh, who's the owner of the ABL Giants. And Josh and I talk about prospects throughout the year. So I'm really happy to have him on board. Been trying to angle to get him on the show. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Josh in. So we can start our conversation. How you doing, Josh?
Doing well. I was glad I had baseball practice today that we had to cancel, which is why I was able to pinch hit, as you could say. I'm interested to see, now everyone can pinch hit. Am I able to step up to the plate cold? No real research.
That's
Just
right.
jump right in and do a good job. We'll see.
I think you're going to be all right.
I'm normally a guy that comes over prepared, and so today, not even by my standards, by anyone's standards, I'm underprepared. So we'll see how this goes.
I think you'll muddle through. So listen, we have some interesting topics to cover today. And like I said, I know you and I kibitz about prospects throughout the year and fantasy baseball in general. Throughout the year. Which is a lot of fun. And one of the great things about being in a large league where you get to meet people from all over the country and talk baseball, which is of course what this is all ultimately about, right? And before we get into the topics for today, I just, as I often do, I'm interested to hear our guests' views on prospecting, views on dynasty, and just to hear a little bit about your background with dynasty baseball. And then more particularly, how you approach prospecting and how you think about prospects.
Right. So this is actually my first dynasty baseball league. I had, on the same year I joined the ABL, so slightly before, because I joined the ABL mid-year. I joined a keeper league, which is, I guess in the moment I consider that kind of dynasty, but it really is. It's nothing compared to at least a 30-team dynasty league with 20 minor league spots for every team. But I've always been, I would say, plugged into the Red Sox minor league system. That's my team. We'll talk a little bit more about the Red Sox. I'm sure I can't help it, but I never really the league as a whole, other than maybe like the top 100, top 50 guys I kind of had a general awareness of. And then obviously I always kept my eyes on the top guys for redraft leagues. But really, this was my first foray into a dynasty league, and so it's been a learning experience for me. You asked about my general approach to prospecting, and it's if I had to be honest with myself, at first I had no idea what I was doing, and it took a lot of mess ups and screw ups for me to be able to look at myself and say, you don't know what you're doing, and you need to acknowledge that you are not good at prospects, and you need to rely on other people to help you with prospects. So while you might think we're having, just a one-on-one conversation, I'm really just picking your brain to get better knowledge of prospects, because you're one of many guys in this league who I think have far superior prospect knowledge and how to handle them when compared to me. So
That's kind of you to say, but I will tell you this, Josh. I was in the same boat at one point, right? And I think anybody who gets into a serious dynasty league, which ABL certainly is, and probably more serious than any other league either one of us will ever be involved with. It's a steep learning curve when it comes to prospects, and I think you come to these leagues with kind of fantasy baseball knowledge and a baseball knowledge generally, and you think that's going to get you through, and then all of a sudden you get punched in the face. You're
right.
Like, oh, like I really about this aspect, I don't know anything. And that acknowledgement that you don't know anything is an important moment, right? Because as you just said, you have to take stock of that and say, okay, I have to own this and I have to fix it. I have to address it, right? And I went through that. I've been doing dynasty for several years now, and keeper leagues, and which are, as you pointed out, aren't quite dynasty, but you start getting into prospects. But it takes a lot of research, a lot of effort, a lot of reading, and to start thinking about it. So what I'm interested to hear from you, and I'm happy to share my experience too, but how you've gone about gradually picking away at that learning curve. Like, what's the process?
It's funny. If you talk to me in the Discord, especially in one of the public channels, I guess they're not public, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
Where it's more than just me and you talking, where everyone can see. I like to play up the fact that I was given such a terrible team, bottom 5 major league roster, bottom 5 minor league roster, which is true. But if I'm being honest with myself, that also was a huge advantage for me, because what it let me do, and this was before we had any points minimums, I didn't even look at my team the whole first year. I traded away some key pieces for some prospects that I thought were going to be something, kind of missed on those trades. But what I was able to do, and something that pretty much no one else could do because they were too busy worrying about their own team, I could watch teams like Duke, and that first year, the Cubs had a great year and the Tigers had a great year. And the top 10 or so teams, I was able to look at their teams closely, see what those managers were doing, what was working, why they were so much more successful than, say, the bottom 10 teams. I'm not going to call out any specific teams other than myself. I was one of the bottom 10 teams, but it was kind of like I got 6 months of just being able to watch the league and to learn and to take notes, to go into that first auction and really attack what I felt like were some inefficiencies in the league. And I
Right.
feel like that is the only reason I have had success. I think if I came in and inherited a good team, I would have destroyed that team immediately, and not by trying to, just like on accident, and it would have been a disaster. So in
That's
a lot
very
of ways, I'm thankful for the team I inherited.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's there's something about being a sponge
Right.
that was really useful for you, um, and just not having the pressure to compete when you walked in, um, and so the strategies that you picked up in terms of the draft, the auction itself, because you did have last year, you had a very effective draft. You actually left a lot of money on the table at the
Yes.
auction, but you ended up being able to put together a very competitive team and had a great season. And made the playoffs, and won a little bit of money as a result, which is great.
I did not. I lost money.
Well, yeah, I guess we both got knocked out in the first round, right?
Yeah, me and
Yeah,
Duke were playing for the right to end the year in the green. Funny enough, if I had somehow beat Duke in the first round, which in hindsight, was never going to happen, but in the moment, I thought maybe. But yeah, no, Duke was so good during that final stretch. But if I had beat Duke, Duke would have been the one who didn't make any money, which is quite the change in history. Again, I know it never would have happened, but
I keep joking that Duke's the godfather of the ABL, right? And so it's like
right,
we keep every guest that comes on refers to Duke, so he's slowly taking on a legendary status
right.
in the podcast world. But that's a lot of that strategy developments at the major league level, right? So what I'm curious is, as you were absorbing and kind of like gearing up for year one in earnest for you, and now year two, on the prospecting side of it, that game, like what have you done over the last year and a half to become smarter? Because I think you picked up a lot of very interesting prospects. Um, you're clearly somebody who's reading resources out there. We were talking before the show that you use Baseball America, and I'm wondering what's changed over the last year and a half for you, and how have you developed that aspect of the game for you?
Again, I'm going to refer to Duke here. And contrary to what people might think, at least if you watched us today in the banter channel, me and Duke were going at it pretty hard. We started, just talking about the Red Sox, and then it went off the rails. But Duke and I get along very well outside of that environment. And Duke has been kind enough he would, point me in some directions of, what he's looking at. And he put me on a guy who was the right guy to put me on, and I've been able to follow that guy around. I'm sure everyone knows who it is. I just don't want to give away too much. I'm a little,
Sure.
I'm a little like, I don't think you've had him yet, but Dodgers Joe in that way. I try to protect things I probably shouldn't be, but Duke kind of put me on a guy, and that guy the way that his career has gone has opened my doors to things like the importance of baseball America, and that's the one thing I subscribe to. I read a lot of their stuff and focus a lot on what those guys have to say, and I try to keep it to one source, because I find if I expand too much, my it starts to all get mushed together, and then there's some industry hype guys that I think always get overhyped. I end up buying post hype. I like to find just one source, and for me, that's largely been Baseball America. But I think without Duke kind of pointing me in that direction, I don't know. I think I would have got there, but maybe not as quickly. So again,
Yeah.
I've got to give credit to Duke.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One thing you said really resonated with me, which is that there's a lot of noise in fantasy baseball, including when it comes to prospects. There are so many sources. There's so many subscription services you can go to, free sources. People who have lists, rankings, like all this stuff. And I made a decision a couple years ago to really winnow down what I was reading to a couple sources. I use three right now, but I have two primary sources, one of which is Baseball America, and the other is Baseball HQ, which I've been very open about. I do read Baseball Prospectus as well, although I frankly find them a little less helpful on the prospect side. But I kind of use them as a sanity check for scouting reports, because they do provide a third scouting report source for me. But in terms of daily reading, it's really Baseball America. Baseball HQ is more preseason evaluations, and then they do have very helpful in-season scouting reports where they do live looks and they write summaries, and they often update their rankings of a player based on multiple viewing of that prospect. So I've used those three sources, but I really did make an effort to cull so many sources out of my repertoire, because I was just, flummoxed by it all is the word, if that makes sense. And I think Josh, you're frozen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh,
there you go.
am I frozen?
Yeah,
I can hear
you.
you on my end.
Yep, you're going.
Okay. So I think my internet's on. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think again, that's something I kind of lucked into. Maybe is I'm still not comfortable. Here, I'll put it this way: the most fantasy leagues I've ever been in at one time was last year. I was in 7. I was in a couple industry leagues, because at the time I was doing projections for a website that is since disbanded. And so I lost a couple leagues that way. But also there was a moment last year where it was just becoming too much for me. And so I made the decision to make the ABL my only league. And so I'm at a point now where even like the cost of Baseball America is probably too much for just, trying to get an advantage in ABL. If I was in more leagues, it would make more sense. But it's weighing, what helps me in ABL, but what also do I find enjoyment from reading. And from that standpoint, I can only really justify having Baseball America. So again, it's a lot of factors, that I think have been lucky, that have led me to doing something such as simplifying my process into really just looking at one source, that I think have actually ended up benefiting me kind of by happen chance. Cause I didn't only get Baseball America at first with the thought that I'm only going to have one source to quiet the noise. I only realized after the fact that's the effect it had.
Yeah. Well, how could you know before, right? I mean,
right.
you got to like experience the other options. You brought up an interesting point there, which was, it's enjoyable beyond just your use in ABL. I personally find reading about these prospects, whether it's in Baseball America or elsewhere, just to be really educational about the game of baseball, and it really deepens my appreciation of the game itself and kind of the work that's done to build teams and evaluate prospects. And there's some enjoyment about seeing these people that you've been reading about for years come up the ranks and graduate into the majors, and having read about their pros and cons as prospects and the challenges that they faced and seeing them overcome it. For me, it's really deepened my appreciation of the game, and also in fantasy baseball, it's just made it more fun to have this reservoir of knowledge about these players, excuse me. And certainly with respect to your own personal team, I'm a Cardinals fan, right? And you're a Red Sox fan. Two great franchises, but there's a deeper appreciation that I have found. Even tracking the Cardinals prospects and having a knowledge base of where they stack up against other, prospect systems and how talented they may or may not be coming up the ranks. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way about the Red Sox prospects from reading Baseball America.
Right. I feel like if we talked a little bit earlier about, knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not good at. And for me, it was recognizing I'm not as good at prospects as I thought. But one area that I do feel I'm good at is knowing the Red Sox farm system in particular. I would say, I would hope at least that no one within the ABL knows the Red Sox farm system better than me. That's just coming from being a fan. That's not coming from a place of like me trying to flex on the league. I follow the Red Sox too much, and you'll hear me sometimes make bold claims about how good their farm system is, and people kind of look at me, or they're it's over text, but you can feel them. They're like, I think I don't know if you're really paying attention to what's going on around the rest of the league, and I think that's totally fair. But with the Red Sox in particular, I do feel like I have an advantage there. So I don't want to say too much there, because I do feel like if I'm trying to get a Red Sox prospect or I'm trying to move one, that's probably should be a red flag to whoever I'm talking to.
Sure. And it's interesting too, in that regard, because I think what you run into when you become known as a person who's good about prospecting or good about a silo of prospecting, whether it be the Red Sox or more generally, you'll find that owners become more wary about dealing with you.
Right. Well, luckily, I don't have that problem to the extent you do.
Well,
I'm sure you get it all the time.
I get this question. Well, it's interesting. It goes both ways, right? So I'll give you an example. So I've gotten questions from owners. Why are you moving this guy? Right.
I hate when people ask that question. I'm like, I can't answer that.
and look, I mean, the truthful answer is usually that, like, I view the current short-term value worth doing in exchange for the long-term potential.
Right. Yes.
Right. It's not that I don't like the prospect. I rostered the guy.
Right. Yes.
Right. It's that I have made a decision that I have a short-term need that I want to fill, and I want to move this prospect. Or, maybe I've identified something about another prospect I like a little bit more. And I could be wrong. I mean, the fallibility in evaluating these teenagers is
Right.
so, so great. The percentage of fallibility is so high that, even if you're good at what you're doing, you can be just wrong. And I have made plenty of mistakes.
I have a question for you as it relates to, because you have an immense amount of prospect knowledge already, but you're also a big Cardinals fan, and so I have a question about how this is the real question I have. So I've been making a power rankings, and I put it in the banter chat every day of MLB teams that I just kind of this math thing I'm doing on the side, and I every day I do it, the Red Sox just keep climbing, and it just makes me cringe, because I'm like, everyone is going to roast me for this. I know people are going to find me. There's a part of me that's rooting against the Red Sox ranking high, because I know the accusations that will follow when that happens. So like, they've been ranked 5th in my power rankings, which is absurd. I don't even think they're the 5th best team, but that's where they're ranking right now. Sure. So for you built this huge, an immense project you did on all the prospects in the ABL, which was incredible. But when you did that, the top guy you had, and I know your process was very objective, and you tried to take as much subjectivity out of it as you could. But when you did it, Jordan Walker ends up being the top guy. Was a part of you cringing that's like, oh, of course it's a Cardinals guy that's the top guy? Or were you like, oh, no, that's right, that's correct?
It's interesting. The top two guys in that rating system that I put together for the ABL Prospect Handbook were Jordan Walker and Yuri Perez,
who are both Steve guys. Well, one's Cardinals guy and one is like your dude.
Yeah, I mean, Yuri's my guy.
Yeah.
And I was literally blind to where they were falling in the top 100.
Right, I know.
I didn't look. It was all based on the system I put together. Now, I think they're both incredible prospects. and they both have very high ceilings. Each one of them comes with their own risks, like all prospects, but they are both very exciting players. I wasn't surprised to see either one of them at the top, um, and particularly given the parameters I selected for putting that ABL handbook together. Right, I wasn't surprised. Did I cringe? Um, Honestly, no. Like I was just like, all right, this is how it shook out. I actually thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah, no, ultimately it's funny, but that shows you've got some good confidence in your process, so that I think I would have been shaken to the core. I'd have been like, "Oh no, what did I just build?"
Well, you raised a good point, Josh. I mean, look, I mean, uh, I put a lot of work into reading about prospects, and in thinking about them, studying them, evaluating them, trusting sources that I use. Um, and at the end of the day, if, my opinion, you have to trust your process, right? What's the point if you're not? You know, you also have to accept that no process is perfect, right? And you're going to make mistakes, and it's going to be wrong sometimes, and that's just the way that's baseball.
Right.
It's so generally that's baseball, but it's certainly baseball with prospecting. Um, and so I will stick with the process because I have honed it from my perspective to a point that works for me. And I will take the same calculated risks again and again on players. I'm very eager to delve into the DSL and teenage players. I have a lot of them on my roster. I'll keep doing that. It's high risk, high reward. But I believe in these scouting systems. I believe in Baseball America. I believe in Baseball HQ. And when they tell me a prospect is good, I back check it against how the prospect does over time. But in the blind, and we'll get into this a little bit later in the show, there are prospects who get flagged for me in Baseball America, and they have very limited track records. But if they're talking about them, I'll pick them up. And I usually, in doing that, get that player before anybody else, right? And what normally happens in the normal course is I'm able to monetize that prospect in about in a month and a half, because it takes the industry about a month and a half to integrate the information. On a,
Can we talk about that a little
yeah,
more? I try and do the same thing, which is my general approach. I would say I dedicate maybe I don't know the exact number, but over 50% of the prospects I have are guys that I have labeled as I just see their value going up. I know that there's a first mover in the industry who likes them, so I know the rest of the industry will follow. And in that thinking, I'm then going to capitalize on their value later. Now, I am not good at that second part of capitalizing on their value. You are very good at that. You move your prospects all the time. But what happens for me is I know their hype's going to go up. It goes up, and then I buy in on the hype, and I'm like, no, I'm going to keep them. And then I end up getting caught holding the bag, like with Caleb Killian,
yeah,
who I
yeah,
just keep holding on to, and they keep coming out with excuses, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds right, because I want him to be good. But you would have moved on from Caleb Killian like probably a year before today. So like, how are you able to be so enthusiastic about your guys, but also then be able to set that aside and move them at the right time?
that's interesting. A couple things. One is a confidence, whether it's right or wrong, that I'll be able to find replacements.
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
right. So like I will trade a guy, and then you'll see me pick somebody else up. And normally what happens is, I'll get reactions every once in a while from people like, I've never heard of this guy. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
talk to me in 3 months,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Like, okay. And that's usually what happens. But I have guys on my watch list who I'd love to roster right now. And I'm just like, when I have a deep watch list like that, I feel confident in trading away prospects. I also accept the fallibility in prospect evaluation, and
Mhm.
that no matter how much conviction you have in a guy, um, you have to be willing to pull the cord if you get enough value back at the moment for whatever your need is. And I think that's that's for me the trick is like, am I getting present value that makes it worth jettisoning whatever this person is ultimately going to be worth? And the last thing, I would say is that it's very rare for me to trade a guy that I think is an elite prospect. All
Like
right.
a Yuri Perez, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So the players I'm more likely to trade, even if I like them, are the guys who are like 50 or 55 grades overall.
Mm,
And those guys, the reason I'm willing to trade them is because there's a lot of volatility there. Okay. And there's a lot of fungibility there,
right.
probably more so than the market appreciates. So just because a dude is getting hyped right now and he's a 55 graded prospect or he's on a hot streak in double A or whatever it is, um, I'm much more confident that I can replace that player and that the net of trading that player away will not be that devastating to my farm system. Whereas if I traded a player like Yuri Perez away, that's a huge hit.
Okay.
Because the upside is so much higher for them. So I have a band of prospects that I'm on my team in ABL right now that I like a lot, but that I would trade, like almost without hesitation if the right offer came around.
How much of your roster would you say, or your minor leagues
Right
fall
now,
into the category?
right
Yes.
right now, so it's high right now because
Right.
I have a
That's what I
lot
figured.
of teenagers on my rosters. I went so my draft. If you go back to the prospect draft, I had very few high round picks. It was a very deep draft because we had multiple. We had two DSL. We had two J2 classes in there, all right, and we had the normal first year player draft class, right? So it was just thick of talent. So I backloaded my draft. I had a lot of fourth and fifth round picks, and I just started cherry picking guys I really liked who were coming over from the J15 process.
Yeah, I remember. I don't mean to cut you off, but you
Yeah,
got one guy who you've already traded, Snelling, who
yeah,
you fell to very late, and I was like, of course, Steve got him. I was like, are you kidding me? And then you've already traded him, which is just
yeah.
a
I mean,
perfect
and
example of
there's a trade I made with Sam of the Texas
right.
Rangers, and you know, Snelling. Sam asked me, by the way, why are you dealing him? So, Snelling's a guy I like. I actually own him in multiple leagues, but I think that was a trade. I can't remember exactly who I got for Snelling, but it might have been Kenley Jansen or something. It was like a deal like that, or
Do
maybe
you
it may
have
have been,
Kenley?
what's that?
Do you have Kenley?
I have Jansen now. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
we're gonna be talking.
Yeah.
I want Kenley.
You want Kenley? All right, at least
I'll
he's
put the
gettable.
Red Sox.
He's gettable. I actually traded for Bobby Dahlback, who had gotten called up at the time. Snelling for Dahlback, that was the trade. And I haven't needed third base in my roster, right? So that's a good example, actually. Like Snelling's a guy who got a 55 grade from Baseball America. Has gotten some nice scouting reports early, and his early innings pitched in the minors have been successful and interesting. Um, but he's very young and he's a long ways from the majors. Um, and if I can add present value to my major league roster with a guy like Dahlback who plays multiple positions and should be up a little bit later in the year with the Sox. I don't think he's a great player, but he's got power in a 30-team dynasty league. Like those kind of players can be helpful. Now it sucks that he got sent back down after he got called up, but he's a guy back who's had success in the majors and he's hit a lot of home runs and he does have raw power. He's got some warts as a player, but I felt at that point it was useful for me to get a guy like that. Long term, that trade may be very nice for Sam, right? Because I think Snelling's got an interesting future. But he's a kind of a classic example of a 50-55 guy who I'm willing to deal if I get a player that I think is going to be worth it. And I can be wrong. I've traded away really talented prospects and gotten like a guy that I felt was going to help me in the immediate term, but ended up falling through. I traded in another league. I traded Ellie Deli Cruz last year for Jesus Sanchez because I needed a power hitter at that time. And he was hot at the time, and now he's like a platoon player in Miami. So that hurts. right? And that's an exception because it's just, De La Cruz is a guy who's like a more highly regarded prospect, even, right? So you get burned, and you just have to live with those bruises. I think as a dynasty owner, and just keep not getting scared, keep going at it because you got to trust the process. I mean, so yeah, I've got right now so many teenagers on my roster, and I'm looking over here because I have my roster up, but I got 16, 17-year-old kids, and they haven't even played. I mean, the DSL league hasn't even started yet, but when it does, a lot of those kids are going to shoot up prospect lists. Some of them won't, but some of them will, and then you'll see me monetize them.
Right.
You know,
Which I will relinquish control of your show back to you, I promise.
that's all right.
But as you talk, I have another question relating specifically to one of your players, and that is, oh, please tell me I've got the right Miller here. You have Mason Miller, correct?
I do.
Yes, and so I know he's a big hype guy who you held on to. You could have moved him probably even before the season. He had some hype, but then the hype really started picking up. And I remember some of my sources, things I checked, I was starting to hear murmurs that he was going to come up to the majors, and I messaged you, and I'm like, this dude, he's about to get called up, and you're like, I don't know. I'm like, no, dude, it's happening. And sure enough, he got called up. But I'm curious, is that a guy who you were planning to help you this year, or did his call up, catch you on your feet, and you're like, man, I wish I had moved him?
No, I was counting on Mason this year.
Okay.
So Mason Miller is a guy that I started reading about in Baseball America last season. It was towards the end of the year. He'd been out most of the year with injuries.
Right.
And towards the end of the year, he started to pitch, and this, the buzz on him out of Baseball America was just electric. I read some
Big time.
very, very, very small sample size.
Right. Like we're talking like 25 innings.
Yeah, and the reports I was reading, it wasn't just one dude. It was like multiple reports. It's like holy cow, this guy's fastball is electric, and he's got a nasty slider to go with it, and he's got some other pitchers he can throw. If he can ever master those, look out. And then there was the red flag about his durability, right, and his lack of track record. And then he lit the AFL on fire. The Arizona Fall League, and I followed that because he was on my radar, towards the end of last season. And during the draft, or auction draft, not the prospect draft, Duke nominated a minor league player for bidding, and I was like, I had an exchange with Duke in the chat room. I said, "Are we allowed to nominate like these players right now? He's a minor leaguer," and he said, "Oh yeah, you can nominate if he's like passed through a prospect draft already, you can nominate him." And I immediately, thought about Mason Miller, who was 15th on my board overall for the prospect draft, and he was close to the majors. He was in AAA. I knew he was going to start in AAA, and I had read all this crazy stuff about him. So I put him. I nominated with my next nomination for $1, and Dave at the Athletics bid $2, and I had a max bid of $3. And he just, passed through the 8 hours at $3 or whatever. And from everything I had been reading going into the season, the Athletics were just extraordinarily high on him. They obviously have a crappy rotation, and they had been very aggressive in promoting him. And so I thought he would get called up early in the year. I did not expect him to get called up so quickly. But I had no intention of trading him.
Okay.
And I just, because really the format more than anything else in ABL, it's just so pitching starved, and the value of a cheap pitcher. So I have him for $3. And as you know, in our format, he'll go up to $5 next year, and I'll have the option after that season to extend him if I want. So I have a long look, at Mason, and to leverage that contract, whatever he's going to be worth is potentially gold, so I have every intent to hold on to him. We'll continue to see how he pitches. There may come a point where he gets like so much hype and so much attention that it's worth dealing him. Although my perspective on the ABL this season is that there are just some very top heavy teams. In other
Yours
words,
included.
no, thank you, but like I think there are some really strong teams in the National League this year in our league, and it, that's going to influence my desire to trade prospects for high end guys.
Right.
It's going to diminish it, right? Because is it really worth marginally, incrementally improving my major league team to get eliminated in the second round as opposed to the first round or the third
Yeah,
round?
I mean, I'm looking at another first round elimination, I think, this year. My
Yeah,
division, I'd be lucky to win my division. I mean, I'm not saying I can't, but I have the D-backs and the Dodgers. That if I could very easily finish behind both those teams. And then I'm looking at a first round matchup versus Duke again. Like, or
right.
Jeff. Jeff might not. I mean, Jeff's probably not going to beat Duke in the division. And then now I'm playing Jeff first round. I lose to Jeff. So yeah, I'm right there with you. But I asked about Miller for a secondary reason, and that is, well, one, I think this arguably might be the best possible league format for a guy like Miller. He's a guy who's probably going to get one win this year, maybe
Right.
two.
Right.
And in most leagues, that's a big problem. But not only do we have quality starts in this league, we do something called QA7, which actually, if you just get to the fourth inning, and allow a run or less, you get a QA7. I think Miller's going to do that all the time. So this is kind of the format for Miller. So that was one curiosity. But the other reason I asked the question is watching the Miller thing happen caused me to pick up a couple guys.
Oh, tell me about it. Tell me about it.
Because it made me reevaluate some of the value there, in the sense that Miller, as you mentioned, is a guy who no one took him in the prospect draft, and you got him in the auction. So I started scouring who are some guys that should be rostered, that are pitchers that are probably coming up this year, but no one has. And I found two guys that I have on my team right now. And in my opinion, there's more out there. I just don't have room for them. One is JP France, who makes his first start today. He's not rostered because he's 29.
Yep.
But he's got some reliever profiling. But this is a dude who is a strikeout machine. He's got exceptional stuff. I think Eno has him in the top 5 in AAA for stuff plus. But no one rostered him because he's 29. I'm like, that's a dude who's going to get a shot this year. So I picked him up. The other guy, probably closer to Mason Miller in the sense of a true prospect, is for some reason Mike Vassell wasn't rostered on the Mets. And he's already, the rumor is that he's likely, if not their best, very close to their best pitching prospect. And he's in AA right now. He's probably going to get a shot in the majors at some point with the injuries they're having. So I just wanted to say that what you did with Mason Miller was so good and so valuable that I'm like, I need to do this. And I know I'm neither of those guys are Mason Miller, but I know I'm trying to find Mason Miller light. I'm trying to replicate what you're doing. And that's kind of an example of, that's basically how I play the ABL. Someone does something really smart and I'm like, no, I'm going to do it.
No, look, I mean, imitation is the best form of flattery, I guess, so,
Right.
so thank you. But like, you do learn from your other owners. And there's certainly a lot of owners in ABL that I learned from. And, you never should stop learning, developing your skills. And I watch what owners like Duke does, and Jeff and I are in a bunch of leagues together, and I think he and I like cannibalize each other's moves through various leagues. And there's a guy that I'm very good friends with. He's not in our league yet, but I'm trying to get him into our league. Who he and I are in several leagues together, and when I prepare for a prospect draft, his rosters are one of the first things I look at. It's like, who's not on my team that he has? Like, and there's only like, I think ABL right now is the only dynasty league that he and I are not both in. And so, when I prepare for the ABL draft, I go to my friend Tom's rosters in all my leagues that I'm in with him. And I'm like, all right, I don't have this guy, this guy, this guy, and that guy. And then I put them on my board and I figure out where they're, where to rank them. But that's a great resource. And he and I talk about prospects throughout the year. And he's got a very different approach than I do. He's very analytical and mathematical. He's a dude who creates his own model for the draft, both minors and majors. And we're doing NFBC together this year in a couple leagues. And it was really interesting to see the confluence of our processes and how they dovetailed and how they diverged And we joke with each other about the guys we were telling each other we should draft who we didn't take. So there are some players that I like that he didn't. I'm like, yeah, they're doing well, and he'll do the same thing to me. That's been fun. But you always should learn, I think, from the other owners.
Tom, you said Tom's his name?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
Tom sounds like what I am hoping to be one day. Like I'm very similar, very mathematical, just quite haven't figured out how to put it all together. But I we have a very good crop of owners right now, so I don't think we should add them. Let's leave them out.
Well, he's in a league with Jeff and me, and so Jeff knows him, and he's a
Okay.
shark.
All right.
He's very, very good, and a nice guy, and very analytical and
Yeah,
mathematical.
that freaks me out. I think I obviously people who I don't understand freak me out more, but people who like their process is the same process as mine, but they're better at it, freak me out almost as much. And so I want nothing to do with this dude.
Well, you might learn from him.
Yeah, that's true. I'm true. And I'd have to learn from him. Right. I'm still trying to learn from Duke. I don't know if I'll ever watch him, but maybe one day.
Well, the interesting thing about Duke, Duke's obviously done extremely well in this league, and he's clearly a strong owner. But I had him on the show for the first episode, and he's only been doing Dynasty for this is his fourth year.
Yeah, well, that doesn't make me feel any better.
Well, no, but I mean, but the point being is that he's actually not that experienced at it either, right? And I'm sure Duke is learning. Now
That's
that may be
scary.
all right, but I think the thing to appreciate about all this is that you start to become a little wary of making deals with the smarter owners, which is already like happening when I do prospect deals now, right? It's like people are like, "What are you trying to do to me?" Right?
Right.
And I'm not that smart. Like,
I don't know about that. You can pretend that's not true at all.
I'll tell you another funny anecdote. So there's some things I get now at this stage of the year with my roster, my minor league roster. I had an owner tell me like, your prospects seem kind of light, and I'm thinking to myself like, oh, like I'm a good prospect guy, but because you haven't heard of my prospects, you think my prospect system is light. I'm like, all right, let's revisit this in like 2 months.
Right.
Let's see what you think then, right? Which is an interesting part of like prospecting too, which is that the price just goes up, right? I mean, the actual time to buy a guy is when people don't know who he is.
Exactly right. Yeah, and you saw that I have Miguel Blaise.
Yeah.
You think I would know how to say his name? I do not.
I wanted to talk about him because he's a Red Sox guy, which brings me to why don't we delve into this particular topic about how to balance? This is the topic I had, like hometown savant or homer, right? So for you, like
Homer.
you're a Red Sox fan, and you can be both, I suppose, right?
No, I'm a homer. Yeah.
Right. So like I know you love Miguel, all right, and there's a lot to like. There's a lot to like. He's a prospect that's very interesting. He's got a lot of noisy tools. He's got some contact issues that probably are a little scary. But like, talk to me about your love affair with him. This is like the Whitney Houston moment. Like, I will always love you. This is your guy. So tell me about it.
So he's a guy that Brendan had him, and I had known he had him, and I was watching him from afar, and I was just staying away because I'm like, he's too expensive to acquire right now, Josh. He's too expensive. Everyone knows about him. The hype will never be higher. But the hype kept building and building, and I have some of my own models, and I factor in risk pretty heavily. But one day I was just like, what happens if I take the risk out of the model? Like, just who's projecting the highest? And he projected the highest for me if you just completely ignore risk, which is a very stupid thing to do. But and it was especially stupid for me because as soon as that happened, I'm like, well, if there's a 1% chance that it all clicks, he's the best player in baseball, and now I need him. So I paid Brendan quite a bit to get him. I think I gave him. Let's see. I can probably pull up the trade. Let's see, where is Blaise?
Brendan's a very sharp owner, by the way.
And yeah, that's the other problem, right? It's we were talking about a sharp owner here who tries to also play down his threat level. But I gave him Khalil Watson, who is basically Miguel Blaise. So right there, I'm kind of doing a 1-for-1.
Right.
like basically the same dude. But on top of that, I gave him Blake Snell, who is, you know how important pitching is in this league. And I wasn't going to keep Blake Snell. I was going to drop him. But then the way the auction ended up going, I probably would have rather had Snell at that price. I also gave him a 4th round pick, which a 4th round pick in like my hands might not be very valuable, but a 4th round pick in your hands or in Brendan's hands, quite valuable. I'm pretty sure that's where he got Blyce even.
Right.
And then also gave him John Birdie, who is pretty valuable in our leagues. We get 2 points per steal. And then I got lucky that the day I made that trade, the Marlins went and got Arias.
Yes.
And kind of made Birdie gave him less playing time. But like you can see, that was just me wanting my dude. And so in that sense, that was a homer move. There's no defending it. I just really, really wanted Blyce on the like 1% chance he's the best player in baseball.
Sure. Look, I did a similar thing in the draft this year. It wasn't quite as expensive for me to acquire, but I picked, Elijah Green at number 2 overall. Right. And I passed Jackson Holiday in the process, who's right now on fire. Right. And I did that because I, believe in the scouting reports about Elijah Green that there is a chance that he is going to be just a complete monster superstar. And, there are just very few players in baseball who have gotten the 70-70 in power and speed from Baseball America. And the risk is his contact rate and his strikeouts. And it may take longer for him to hit, and he may not ever, be a stud that he could be. But that was a dude that I was willing to roll the dice on because he was a guy I wanted. And I may end up, as I said in the first episode when Duke was giving me, crap about taking him over Jackson Holiday, which is fair. I said like I may end up regretting it. But I believe in the scouting process that I adhere to, and the upside is just so immense that I was willing to take the risk. And Blyce is a guy who could be in a very similar boat. I don't think he has quite the speed that Elijah Green has, but he's got a ton of power. And he's on your team. Which makes it even more fun, right? I mean, that's another element to this whole thing, right?
I'll say Blyce's carrying tool right now is his power, but I think he's plus everything else, and that's what intrigues me about him. I don't know how many people you can say that about, but at worst, you can say his arm is above average, but everything else is flashing his plus right now. You did mention he has some swing and miss issues right now, specifically against breaking balls, but this is the thing. I have Red Sox stats other people don't have. So I can see the amount of breaking balls he's seen this year has been tremendous, and he's still doing decent. So I feel like that's a good sign. But what I have on the Red Sox, I don't do this for anyone else. This is just out of my own curiosity. I have them all rated on what I would give them overall on the 20 to 80 scale, but also like their range of outcomes. And so, for example, I have Marcelo Meyer is a 55 with a 40 to 70 range of outcomes. Mm-hmm. Blyce I have as a 50, and this is by far the widest range. I have him as a 30 to an 80. So there's that really slim chance. I mean, we're talking like 3 standard deviations away from what his actual projection is that he's an 80. But if he is an 80 and he's not on my team, I will forever be sad.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, look, at the end of the day, sometimes you just got to get your dues.
Right.
I mean, and that's okay.
And let's talk about it. So I had 2 picks this year in the rookie draft. I was not planning to take Red Sox with either. But here's the thing about our league. It's not just that I'm very biased in favor of the Red Sox. There is definitely some anti-Red Sox bias. And so at every opportunity I can get a Red Sox guy. And so I was staring down. I have him as the 7th best guy in our system. His name's Mikey Romero. He's a typical Chaim Bloom pick. He's the shortstop. I have him as 45, but a 30 to 60. My grades will be a little lower than like Baseball America probably has him as a 50 or 55, but I have him as a 45. But I really like him, and I had him as a back end 1st round pick in my rankings. Yep. He fell all the way to the 3rd, which was my first pick, and I'm like, here we go, I'm gonna get him. But he's falling, and I realize too late that the person before me is Don, who's a Red Sox fan. And if I'm a Red Sox homer, Don is a Red Sox homer times two. He is way more of a Red Sox homer than me. For example, Flash, this story is going all over the place.
That's all
Go
right.
back 2 years prior. So before, this is another example of me being a Red Sox homer. I had a guy named Connor Siebold, who I was a big fan of.
Sure.
One of the few guys I actually picked up in my first year in the ABL, just because he was tearing it up. And what made me like him particular is we got him as a Rule 5 pick from the Yankees, I believe. And so that made it even better. If he's going to be good and we got him from the Yankees,
Sure.
he's then that's the guy I want. So you can see the bias. But
Sure.
he was $3, and my math was telling me he's not worth $3. Even in a free, you don't have to put him on a contract. It was a second year. So I dropped him, sent him to the auction. The auction plays out. So it's my first year doing the auction. I'm kind of running out of guys I like. So I'm like, what the hell? I'll nominate Siebold again and try and get him for less than $3. So I put him in there and I put a $2 max on him, try to get him $1 left. And immediately Don comes in and bids $3 on him and gets him. I'm like, what the hell, Don? He just sees the Red Sox player and he takes him. Since Siebold's been DFA'd, he's pitching for the Rockies now. He's not doing well. But that's two Red Sox homers going at it. So basically, now I'm scarred from that experience. We're now in this rookie draft, and Mikey Romero is just falling and falling, and I'm like, Don's going to take him. He's the pick before me. Don's going to take him. What do I do? What do I do? So I am like every single owner on the clock for like 2 hours. I'm like, they're on the clock. I'm like, trade. Let's trade. You know, half of them don't see it. The other half's like, no, I really got a guy I want here. I'm like, trust me, you do not want him as much as I want this guy. I will overpay. And they're like, nope. I'm taking him, whatever. So we get all the way to Don's pick. And sure enough, the pick before me, he takes Mikey Romero. And at this point, everyone I've been talking to already knows that's who I wanted because I was just being very open about it. And they were just, you know, I'm giving all these DMs like, oh, that sucks. So
Sniped.
Yeah, I got sniped. And so I'm like in this depressive state. I've been so singularly focused on getting Mikey Romero that I'm not paying attention to what's happening in the rest of the draft. So all these guys, it's like 15 picks have gone off the board. So I'm going through my list of rankings and just crossing the guys off one by one. I get to my next ranked guy, and I'm on the clock, and it's Roman Anthony. And I'm like, oh man, here we go, another Red Sox player. So of course I took him, and I have Roman Anthony ninth. I still have him behind Mikey Romero. I'd rather have him, but Anthony's the guy that's had a lot of hype. Yeah. He's got a beautiful swing, which is where most of the hype's coming from. Because it'd be hard to find a guy with a better swing than Roman Anthony, and he's another guy with some power. I know you had him in your top 100.
Yeah.
But that's how I ended up getting him. So I have one Red Sox only because I missed another Red Sox. I have one other pick, 5th round. We get all the way to the 5th round, and who's the top of my list? Luis Perales, who's the Red Sox, probably their 3rd best starting pitching prospect. Another really young guy. He's like Blyce Light, but for pitching. Probably a lot of reports said he was the best pitcher in the what do they call it, the DSL, but he's got a lot of problems as well. So I took him, and now I have 2 Red Sox players, and I could have had another, just because of, I don't know if that's bias that's built into my list or I'm the only person valuing those guys properly, but I end up getting, instead of, I could have had Mason Miller, but now I've got a single A pitcher for the Red Sox. So.
Well, I mean, blissfully, you could not have had Mason Miller because I drafted him, I guess, in the non-rookie draft, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There can be, in my view, a lot of advantages to being ginned up on a particular system if the system is a good one. There can be downside if it's a shitty one, right?
I think the Red Sox, no one knows yet, which is the scary thing.
Right. I mean, so, I think all those guys that you drafted are very interesting prospects. And then, Mikey Romero is an interesting prospect too. Baseball America gave him a 55 grade. And he's a nice spec as well. A guy that I reached for in the first round, I traded up to get him, was Dylan Lesko. San Diego was a guy I really liked that had fallen down the board. And you see guys who are undervalued in the draft, and you go get them. And leveraging your knowledge, I think, of the Red Sox is a big advantage for you because I think there is bias against the Red Sox. A lot of East Coasters out here, right? There's a lot of kind of animosity to Boston. I'm wearing my Celtics jersey, shirt today. And
Go Seas.
tomorrow I'll be wearing my Marcus Smart, throwback jersey. The Urban Bill Russell edition jersey. My wife is from Philadelphia,
Wow.
so it'll be all out war in the house
Okay.
tomorrow. But
Well, these last 3 days we got baseball and basketball.
yeah. So we shall overcome in Boston. But it's the only Boston team I root for is the Celtics.
Right. That's right.
But you can take advantage of that. And it's interesting for the Cardinals. I'm very familiar with their system because I not only do it through just my general prospecting process, but of course I double down on the Cardinals. But I actually own very few Cardinals. And
Is that because of your self-control, or is that because we have like 6 Cardinals fans in this league?
it's a little bit of both.
Right.
I think there is irrational enthusiasm about Cardinals prospects amongst the ABL owners, and it becomes almost impossible to acquire them in trades for a reasonable price. There's just a tax that you end up paying that I'm not willing to pay.
Right.
I'm willing to sell them because people will pay for them.
Heck yeah.
And so there are a handful of prospects that I've had that were Cardinals prospects that I've dealt in the ABL. For example, a guy that right now that I would trade in a heartbeat if I could get a king's ransom for him, be Mason Wynn,
Okay.
who I like, but I think he's just being grossly overvalued by the market right now.
I keep my eye on your guys' Cardinals chat sometimes, and there's a lot of Mason Wynn talk in there, so I think you're probably right.
Look, he's a very exciting player, and I think he may be a better real life player than a fantasy player. And he's an electric shortstop. He's got great fielding instincts. He's got a cannon for an arm, but none of that matters in fantasy baseball, unless you're just talking about playing time. Limited power. It may come eventually. He's got some speed. He's got a decent bat. He's actually struggling a little bit with some, advanced pitching right now. There's been some scouting concern about his ability to handle fastballs and upper level breaking pitches. And if you look at his minor league stats right now, they're not great. And he's young for AAA. He's being challenged by the Cardinals. And that's a good thing. But ton of spring hype, just a ton of enthusiasm among Cardinals fans. And again, I'm not saying he's a bad player. I'm just saying that he's overvalued right now in my view. And if I had him and I put him on the block, I think the offers would be extraordinary for him.
Probably, yeah.
And there's something to be said just about the general hype machine that goes on with these prospects. A guy like Jordan Walker, who I saw being drafted in NFBC leagues, which are basically redraft leagues. And these experts were drafting him for $13, $15 on a $260 budget, which is insane.
Kind of insane, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and Tom and I are doing that league together, a couple of those leagues together, and we were just like, he was off our board.
Yeah, it's always a bummer.
We were just like, we're just not paying more than $2 for him. I mean, it's just like ridiculous. And now he's been sent down, and it's a disaster for the people who drafted him. But yeah, I think knowing when to like back off your guys in your home team's farm system is also valuable. I think the guys you have on your roster is actually fewer Red Sox than I thought. When I pulled up your roster, I thought I was going to have more minor leaguers in it.
I did move one recently. I moved Chris Murphy. And actually, I have a quick story.
Yeah,
it's unrelated to Chris Murphy. It is related, but before the story, I just wanted to say you are so much more reasonable about the Cardinals than me. I can just tell than me about the Red Sox. I can just tell. You do not have moments where you dip into clear homerism with them like I do. I will do that probably once a month. But I ultimately think what it is when I reflect back on how did I end up with 2 Red Sox, and if I hadn't missed on another guy, I I would have had him instead. And he was also a Red Sox player. How did that happen in the rookie drafts? How much of that was homerism? What it ultimately is I have a process, and the process is telling me to take those guys. But if the guy was on any other team, I would have thought about it a lot longer. I would have double checked things. I would have made sure it made sense for my build. But if it's a Red Sox, I don't do any of that. I just take him because he's at the top of the list. And that's a little bit of homerism, maybe more than I'm willing to admit. But I think that's the answer to your question. Yeah. But I did just move Chris Murphy. I moved him for I think $3 fab. That's all I moved him for. And part of what made that a little easier is I believe the Chris Murphy trade was the same trade I got Ronan Kopp in, who is getting a ton of hype right now. Oh, yes, I got Ronan Kopp and Taijuan Walker and a 3rd-round pick for.
Oh, that's not bad.
I did trade Andrew Heaney, but Joey Wentz, Drew Rom, not to be confused with Romo, and then a couple of 4th-round picks. But I moved him back to the team that had him for $3, and that was because I'm falling a little bit out of love with Chris Murphy and was starting to fall in love with another Red Sox prospect whose name is, I'm blanking, Shane Drohan.
Okay.
And so I have known about Shane for quite a while. I knew heading into the year, the industry is completely unaware of him, but he's a borderline top 10 Red Sox prospect. But, the industry is going to take 3 or 4 months. So I'm like, I have time. This relates back to, we talked about a little bit about when to make a move for a guy. So he's a guy that's been at the top of my watch list for forever, because I knew that this guy was a top 10 Red Sox prospect, which makes him pretty valuable in the league because the Red Sox have about their borderline top 10 farm system. So he's a solid prospect. And him being a Red Sox automatically goes, to the top of my watch list. Now, there were other guys like Mike Vassell who I decided to pick up instead of him because he's a Met. And so Mets are just going to get more hype. So I pick up him instead. And each time I opened up another roster spot, I picked up JP France or someone else. Yep. Some of the guys we already talked about, because I was confident that the world did not know about Shane yet. Now, Shane started getting some more and more hype. He's pitching super well. So, and I'm starting to hear rumors that he's not actually a borderline top 10 Red Sox prospect. He is the number 5 Red Sox prospect and the best pitching prospect in the Red Sox whole system. This is what I'm hearing. So I'm like, it's starting to happen. People are catching on. Some of the Baseball America guys are like, anyone notice that Shane's got like a 0.6 ERA and a 0.6 whip? And so I'm like, they're talking about him. So I go to pick him up. The day I go to pick him up, a division rival of mine, the Padres, put in a bid for him for $1, and I only put in a bid for $1, and they got him. And the top guy on my list for like the last 3 months goes to another guy, and I've been just knocking on the door with the Padres, being like, "How much fab you want? Like, I'll give you all of it. I just want Shane Drohan, but he's not budgeting, so."
Yeah. Well, one of the topics for today was pulling the trigger, right? When do you get your guy in your watch list? That's a great story because you can definitely, wait too long and get sniped, right? And I just had a very, similar kind of decision-making process. And I ended up getting the guy, which is Sandlin for the case, the Royals prospect.
Right.
And he has a nickname. I like guys with nicknames. His nickname is
I noticed
Sandman.
that about you, yeah.
And, he was a guy that was not on my radar at all until Baseball America started writing about him at the beginning of the year. And so much of my process is just reading. It's not that complicated. It's like, right. I read Baseball America. But, he showed up in RoboScout and a couple times. And he has ridiculous peripherals right now. He's an A-ball, high A-ball. He's 22, so he's a little bit old for his level, but he's one of these players that was in the CPX last year. So this is his first exposure to the minors, and I'm very interested to see if he gets advanced quickly to AA, which will be a good sign. But his strikeout ratio is over 40%, and his walks minus strikeouts is ridiculous right now. It's like over 30, I think. In 5 games, five games started, right? So incredibly small sample size. So when I first started reading about him in Baseball America, he had like 3 starts,
I was like, okay, I'll watch this guy, right? Like I put him on the watch list. I was like, all right, he's like a 5th-round draft pick or something like that. He's got the kind of a prototypical starter's build. He's like over 200 pounds, 6 something. Um, but I never heard of the kid, so I was like, all right, I'll watch him. Right? He shows up again in Baseball America. I'm like, well, all right, now I have to start thinking about like, are the other sharks in the league going to start picking this guy up, right? And I'm like, all right, and now it's 4 starts, right? Like, okay. I wait. And then he had his 5th start and he lit it up again, right? And then he showed up in Robo Scout again. Like, and they're talking about his spin rate on his slider. And so I was like, all right, we're done. Like, I'm putting a claim in now because, like, if I wait one more day, like, there's going to be a shit ton of claims for him.
Yep.
And so I got him, and we'll see what happens with him. But now he's on my roster, right? And so I can just kind of play it out. And I think, the lesson that I've learned is that when you really like a player and you've kind of starting to develop conviction in him, you should just add him, because you'll end up regretting it more if you don't. The cost of acquisition is so low in most instances when you're getting them off the wire. It's $1, right? And obviously Fab is valuable in our league, and you don't want to spend bucks indiscriminately, but I'm much happier having Sandlin on my roster than not right now.
Yeah.
And I can monetize him later in the year. And he's another dude, like, when I picked him up, a lot of owners probably never heard of him before.
Mm-hmm.
Just as I hadn't.
He was on my watch list. I'll say that.
There you go. But that's because you read Baseball America.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's exactly why.
Right. So, like, but you can also tell other owners are paying attention to certain resources, right? So I know that there are several, ardent readers of Baseball America. And when I start seeing a player mentioned multiple times in Baseball America, they automatically get elevated on my, pickup list, because there's not going to be too many shopping days left till Christmas for those guys. In contrast, not a lot of guys read Baseball HQ, right? Which is much better for redraft and keeper leagues than it is for prospecting in season. But every once in a while, they will have a live look at a player, and I'll get an update on some player who they're seeing for the first time, or who they've downgraded or upgraded. Right. So, in terms of their scouting grade, right. And I have frequently gone in and looked for a prospect that I've read about in Baseball HQ and found out they're on somebody else's team, and then I'll inquire. Right. And so the upgrade in the scouting report hasn't hit yet, the industry news. Right. And, that's, I'll acquire guys that way before they kind of pop, broader industry news. That's, I feel much more relaxed about those guys than I do about guys who show up in Baseball America. There's too many people reading those things. Sandlin, by the way, is a dude who started, being tweeted about.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So you're seeming to have you can kind of sense after a certain amount of mentions on Baseball America, that's when you'll pull the trigger. And I'm similar in the sense that Baseball America is really the only resource that I have that if I see a guy on that on there, I know that I have to make a move soon. But the real thing that causes me to pull the trigger is Twitter. So I follow a bunch of prospect guys I take zero advice from. Their sole role is to let me know when the hype is reaching the masses. And so I'll get notified when they tweet about a guy. And every day I just go through the list of guys they've mentioned. I compare it to my watch list. And if they mention a guy, I know today's the day I have to make a decision on if I want this guy or not. And I'm very much, I do this. That sounds like a lot of work. Oh, it is a lot of work. And you don't even know the half of it. Another thing I do is every single prospect that I flag in one of my processes, I search, see if they're rostered. If they're rostered, I go and I look at the exact day they're picked up. Then I go and I write the day they were picked up down. And then I have tracked over time, have I been able to shrink the gap of how much I've missed the day they were picked up? And I have significantly, but I'm still working on it. But there's certain guys I know. You're one of them. The A's are one of them.
Yep.
Jeff is one of them. There's just certain guys that I know I'm not always going to beat them. I'm going to take my L's to them, and I can't control that. It's there's certain, I'm not going to name names, but there's certain guys I know if they're beating me to a guy, that's a problem. I need to be able to beat them because I know they're getting their information not necessarily from Baseball America.
Yep.
I maybe need to be a little bit better about not even waiting till the point where they make it onto Twitter. With a guy like Sandlin, but like when you picked him up, that was just kind of like, Steve just beat me on this guy. And
Yeah, and look, he's a guy who could flame out and be nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
but when you see a dude who's got a 40% strikeout rate, even though it's just 5 starts, I'm like, well, I'm going to roster him, right? Because like, what's the harm?
And this is another thing I found that a benefit by accident. That's kind of how we started this podcast, is me talking about a lot of benefits I found in this league just by happy accidents. I moved some of my more elite, maybe you'd say top 100 guys. If you look at my system, you're not going to be overly impressed. Maybe you know a name or two if you don't know a lot about prospects. If you're Steve, maybe there's like 6 or 7 guys you like, and there's still going to be a lot of guys you're like, I don't even know who the hell that is or why he has them. But what I have found by moving some of the top guys, I have so much more flexibility in my minors that I am able to really be quick about adding and dropping guys until I just find a mix I like. And those are the guys that end up being the most valuable, or kind of the guys that come off the radar. Like for me, it was Vinny P.
Sure.
Vinny Pasquantino. He's a guy I jumped in the league and I picked him up, and he's been amazing for me. So. And a lot of my other top guys are just guys that I kind of stumbled into my lap because I just happened to trade for them at the right time. Ryan Nelson, I got him from Harry because Harry was like, this guy's sucking it up. And I was like, I'll take a shot. I know their AAA is pretty brutal. Another guy, Brian Bayo, Red Sox prospect. I don't remember. I think it was Tony gave him to me because he'd been struggling. And I was like, I hear really good things about him from my Red Sox guys. And so like, I'd like to say that I know what I'm doing, but I think I just am getting lucky of the guys that are falling into my lap.
You give yourself some more credit, Josh. I mean, I think you're doing a lot of work, right?
I do put in more work than but it's like I go through my roster and there's like 4 or 5 guys that I don't necessarily like, but I've been very lucky with the guys that I have on my roster, especially my pitchers this year. Really just seem to be hitting. And not by anything I'm doing. I think.
No,
I think it's just
you have a process, right? But I think what you're describing, really has a lot of overlap with what some of the other guys I've had on the show have said, which is just it illustrates how much work you got to put in to be good at this, and you have to love baseball. You really do, right? To be good in Dynasty, you really have to love baseball, because if you're going to get into it, it does require a lot of sweat equity. And
actually, can I clarify something that I mean when I say it's nothing that I'm doing? I recognize that I just said some of the processes that I do that sound crazy and sound like a ton of work. I know I'm putting in a ton of work. The reason it feels like that is whereas with the MLB players, I make my own projections that factor in all sorts of things that no other projection system has, and then it spits out auction values, and I use my real life work to be able to do that. That's where that skill's coming from. I don't do that with the minors. All the work I put in the minors is just acquiring other people's work and putting it into like basically a database of what other people think. So when I hit on a guy, it doesn't feel like I'm hitting on it because it was someone else who pointed them out to me first. And that's what I mean when I feel like I'm getting lucky. I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Whereas like with my major guys, I'm like, no, I built that projection. I flagged that guy. It's not the same for the minors with me.
Yeah, what I would say, I hear what you're saying, the distinct and the differences that you're highlighting. But what I would say is that there is just so much data out there on minor leaguers, right? That it is a Herculean task to try to model for them. It's too much,
right?
In my opinion,
there's too many guys. There's too many.
Yeah, there's thousands of dudes. I mean, there's so many. We have 600 rostered in the ABL, and there's still like hundreds and hundreds more who are available. And I think we're all, to one extent or another, relying on other sources. It's just a matter of what level of detail you're willing to go into, right? And so, you rely on Baseball America, as I do, right? And so you have a base, and you have a pool of players they've highlighted and you're interested in, but then you're doing supplemental, incremental work along the way. You're looking at stats, you're looking at performance, and you're supplementing your watch list and kind of tracking it, and you're doing your diligence, on the game theory about it, in terms of when to pick guys up, and when do I have to make a move, and how much hype is there on this guy? Is it, is he getting overexposed, underexposed? Identifying buy low guys, right? Who are on other people's rosters. You talked about Bello, you talked about other guys you've picked up over the years.
Well, I'd like to say I identified them, but it was really like I was inquiring about someone else, but there was a gap in evaluation. They were like, how about Ryan Nelson? I was like, okay, sure. And now Ryan Nelson he's struggling a little this year, but there's still a lot to like under the hood. So, but yeah, that's also what I mean by luck. Like Ben Brown, another guy, a Cubs guy who's just been exploding this year, likely going to get called up this year. I got him from Tony for this is just a trail of luck, right? For me, Tony decides one day I'm going to acquire a bunch of expensive guys. I don't know why. No offense, Tony, I don't think you really knew why. But he's like, I want Ronald Acuna. So I went over to him. He's like, pick 2 guys from this list. I picked Luis Medina and Ben Brown. So Ben Brown, boom, big hit. Wasn't expecting that. I then take Luis Medina and turn him into Graham Ashcraft in a trade that involved him. And I wasn't expecting Graham Ashcraft to be an ace this year, to be on par with Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo. He was a distant third. Now he's like in the at least with Lodolo. Yeah. I don't know what's happening. It's just sometimes it just happens. Like I don't know.
But you know what, you end up trusting your sources too, right? So you're relying on Baseball America, and then you're taking a leap of faith effectively by saying, all right, this is somebody I know about.
That's literally what I did. I'm like, Luis Medina, I know the name. Ben Brown, Baseball America likes him.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll take those guys.
Yeah, right.
It's not like I asked about him. Tony put him on a list for me.
Right. So, but I'll tell you apropos of that a funny story, and then we'll close up the pod soon because we've been going for a while. Last year, I was making a trade with a dude, and we were talking about Nick Castellanos for Sandy Alcantara. That was the trade that was being discussed. And it's in a different league, Dynasty League. And the guy who had Nick Castellanos, who I was acquiring, this is before Sandy blew up last year. I said, like, look, this is a fair, straight offer. Like, I'll do it, but that I'm not doing more. And he kept trying to angle me for adding to the deal because he said Nick's more valuable. And I was like, no, he's not. And I will do it straight, but I'm not adding anything to this deal. And so finally, he sends me this email. He says, well, what if I trade you Michael Harris for Rocchio in the deal?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So without hesitation, I'm like, sure.
Well, see, that's the difference between you and me, Steve. He says that and you're like, oh man, this dude just made a mistake. Boom.
Yeah.
Like, let's do it. It happens to me and I'm like, I don't know. Sure. And then it ends up being Michael Harris.
No, but so Michael Harris, Baseball America had just come out with its updated rankings, and the Michael Harris ranking was through the roof. And I had read it, so when he said that, I was like, yes. But that's an example of me just trusting Baseball America. I read the scouting report. It made sense to me. I was like, yeah, we'll do this. I just crushed this dude in a trade. And turned out great. I've since flipped Harris in a deal for Jose Ramirez, which in that league is a big thing. But I think there's a lot to be said for trusting your resources and taking that leap of faith when you have the opportunity. And that's what you're describing fundamentally. Is just with Ashcraft and these other players, it's just being educated. And some of it seems like luck, but it's not. It's sweat equity.
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, it's like I knew Ashcraft was flagged with some trades I made that were heavily criticized. We're not really talking about minors, but I think I traded some minor league guys. And I'm a bit of a rambler, but I made this huge trade with Sam. And this was the same process that led me to Ashcraft. But when I got Ashcraft, I would ask my process wasn't flagging him as a potential ace to bolster my horrible rotation, which I thought was good. But it turns out to be horrible. But I'm just seeing him as a guy that might have some value, and he's on a cheap contract. there's a bunch of other guys that got flagged. I ended up getting 4 of them. I made a list of 11 players. I got 4 of them. Another one was Kerry Carpenter, who is arguably the only good hitter on the Tigers. I don't actually even know what that trade was, but the 2 other guys were Shea Langoliers and and Jeremy Pena. I got relentlessly crushed for this trade because I sent Kyle Schwarber, 2 first-round picks, Simeon Woods Richardson, who's people have been talking about him. He's got some hype. Heston Kierstad, who has a ton of hype, and CJ Crone. So you hear all those names and you're probably also cringing. You're like, that is a ton of value you gave up for Shea Langoliers, Jeremy Pena, and a 2nd-round pick. And then I got Scope as a throw-in, who I ended up moving for some fab. So Scope ended up being valueless to me essentially. But my process has flagged those guys, and they're both performing and they're cheap, and I'm going to have them forever because of how cheap they are.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm learning ultimately about what I'm decent at in this league is my process that leads me to those guys, not necessarily the prospects. So I'm trying to learn from guys like you, where as soon as the guy gets some increased value, send him away, get that value locked in on some sort of player so you can make more trades, like getting Kerry Carpenter, because even after those guys come out, they're still gettable. Sometimes you have to pay a lot, but
yeah. And so the only caveat I would add to that is that be willing to move the guy, but be wary about moving people who are really high elite players. I don't think any of the guys you just mentioned are elite, but I think.
Well, that's again, remember, I have no elite players.
Well, Blyce may become one. So like, I think,
but I'll never move him after what I paid.
I know you won't. But what's interesting too, and this is another factor in this league that doesn't really exist in a lot of leagues, is the contracts. Which we don't really focus on in the pod, but the players you just named are all very expensive players. In terms of your long.
Yeah, I did leave that out. A lot of those guys I moved were 1-year guys, whereas the guys I have now are 6-year guys.
Yeah, so when you gave the list, I didn't cringe because I'm like, well, I know what their contracts are, right? And so one of the things that you really excel at, I think, is you get the economics, and understanding the value of cheap contracts and the ability to keep them long term. A guy like Langoliers has potentially tremendous value because of his position and his power. And particularly in a points league where we don't really care about batting average, that's a guy that, could pay a lot of dividends for you down the line,
Yeah, he's 3 points per game, plays 80% of the games. That's super. He's a top 10 catcher, and this is the cheap.
Yeah, and he's dirt cheap, right? And so, those are the kind of guys you want in a league like this over time. And if you look at Duke's team,
yep, this is how I came to this realization. And it's funny, Duke traded Pena for Tovar. I think that's all he got in that trade was Ezekiel Tovar. I don't mean to say all he got, but I was willing to pay even more for Pena than
yeah. And look, I think Pena has some warts in his game too, and but
he sucks. I don't actually know why he's good at fantasy. He's 3.6 points per game, but Duke can't hit. I don't really know what's happening.
There's a big difference in the scoring system. In Roto, he's a much less valuable player. In the points per
6 home runs, 6 stolen bases. That's where the value is coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, Josh, it's been amazing having you on the show. I'm really happy you were able to pinch hit and take some time away from baseball, and super glad you were able to pinch hit for Lenny, who we'll have on another time. But I could talk baseball with you all day probably, but I don't want to.
I could do the same.
I don't want to get your wife upset, and I'm cognizant of not letting the pod run on for too long so people can watch it.
I think that's the big takeaway for me. When I don't prepare, I just ramble. It goes really well.
It was good. I really enjoyed it, and we'll have you on again later in the year, hopefully. But super fun, and I just remind you and everybody else to ABP, always be prospecting. So thanks again, and we'll see everybody the next time. Take care.